Hello and welcome to the Crochet Cakes YouTube channel. I hope that you've been doing well since the last time we talked, and I want to welcome you to today's video in which we will explore a little bit of what happens when you substitute yarns for a project. Also, before I forget, if you are looking for the Spanish version of this video, visita Crochet Cakes en Español. So join me today with your beverage of choice and let's get into our experiment. So one of the greatest crochet joys for me, at least, is making a garment. I absolutely love building my wardrobe and sometimes my husband's wardrobe stitch by stitch. There is something truly special about that, and while I can be a little impatient in the process, I nevertheless greatly enjoy it. But for someone that loves making garments, I hardly ever find what I need in my stash. And Clarissa of the past, I blame you. Yes, you. But anyway, getting back on track, I think that many of us find ourselves substituting yarns. So what actually happens when we substitute yarns and we do not take anything into account? What I mean by that is we do not take into account the properties of the yarn, and by that of course I mean that wool and cotton behave completely different. We do not take into account the characteristics that the yarn produces in a fabric. So for example, if you have a cotton acrylic blend and you use a big hook, it might be extra drapey, but if you were to use alpaca, it would be even more drapey, so you will probably have to account for that when you're substituting yarns. I also mean we don't even do a gauge swatch, okay? We don't swatch, we don't block, nothing. We just grab our yarn and we go. Now I know that in a previous video we chatted a little bit about this. We explored 5 things to consider when you are planning on substituting yarns. So I will link that up here and in the description box below, which incidentally is where you can find all the things that I chat about in this video. If you're wondering where that is, then Editing Clarissa, please insert a screen recording. But anyway, for this video, I really wanted to demonstrate physically, visually, show you what happens when we substitute yarns. So to answer this question, I crocheted a new monthly sweater. Now the monthly sweater is a pattern that I've recently released, and a big shout out and thank you to my crafty friends that have already gotten their pattern or have visited my website or have seen the tutorial, because you know what? Even if you cannot purchase the PDF pattern, ad revenue is still my friend. Well, I hope it becomes a friend. Anyway, a huge shout out and thank you. And if you're interested in what the monthly sweater pattern is, like I said, it's my newest pattern, my design, and you can find all about it in the description box below, or in the iCard when it comes to the YouTube video. Or for this second monthly sweater pattern that I crocheted, I did exactly as I said. I grabbed yarn and I just went with it. Although, saying that does feel a little bit misleading because I purposely wanted to share with you, the consequences of substituting yarn. Not because I am against yarn substitutions, as I said in this video, I do it a lot. But because I think having a visual help is, well, helpful. Anyway, as I said, just saying that I went for a yarn and that was it feels a little bit misleading because I did put a little bit of thought behind it. So the original monthly sweater pattern calls for an acrylic nylon blend, Snuggle Puff from Recrochet. Now, you might say, oh, acrylic nylon, I got that in my stash. But this Snuggle Puff yarn is a blown yarn. Now, if you do not know what a blown yarn is, I'll find a good link for you to read about that and I'll link it in the description box below. But essentially, a blown yarn means that we have a mesh of some sort. In this case, it is a nylon mesh, and we blow our cotton into it. So that means that this produces a very lightweight, less dense skein of yarn. at least in comparison to its plied counterpart. Plying yarn makes it denser, okay, and blowing it makes it lighter. So I went with a wool yarn, and not only is it a wool yarn, which is completely different from a cotton nylon blend, it is a very rustic wool. Specifically, it is a wool that I've had in my stash since 2018. Well, March 2018 to be precise. To be precise. And how do I know? Well, because March 2018 was the last EYF that I attended, and that is Edinburgh Yarn Festival. Thoroughly enjoyed myself. It was a whole family trip. Kind of wish to go again, and maybe even as a family. But anyway, I bought this yarn in March 2018, and it is Iona wool. It is a very rustic wool. I will link all about Iona wool in the description, as I said. But essentially, I was a bit afraid to actually crochet with it because it feels very rustic, almost jute-like in texture. But even though it wasn't the best yarn to crochet with in terms of how it felt crocheting, it crocheted up beautifully, if I do say so myself. I know you're only seeing a little piece of it now, but I will insert some pictures and a video here so you can see just how the sweater is fitting. Right, but going back to the yarn. So let's review the characteristics. I'm using a wool yarn. It is a plied yarn versus a blown yarn. But because it is wool and not another cotton acrylic blend, it feels very lightweight still. But I will say this, the contrasts that I got, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but the contrast that I got crocheting the second version of the monthly sweater weren't as drastic as I had hoped. But that is because I used wool. Because while there are some differences in the yarn composition and all that, wool does stretch. So when you get it wet, you can block it gently, which is what I've done to one side of the garment, which is my left side. And it'll still stretch. Now I could probably get away with blocking it more aggressively because I literally just wet this and laid it down flat to dry. So I know that if I were to pin it, it would, of course, block more. Also, wool has memory to it, something that the cotton nylon blend really doesn't. So with the wool, once you stretch it, it can still start shrinking on its way, and you would probably have a garment that fits you well for longer, if that makes sense. But I think the contrast of using a wool yarn in this case of this experiment is what actually ended up producing a wearable garment. So while I wanted to compare how the first version of the monthly sweater fits versus how this one fits, I did take a whole bunch of measurements, which I will read to you because I can't remember them all, so I'll have it written down. But I do want to say there's one little caveat that I hadn't realized when I was taking these measurements, and that is that Clarissa originally intended to crochet a same size, size 2, the same size that I crocheted for the sample. However, once I was halfway through one of the side panels, I realized I was not going to have enough yarn. So I had to go stash diving again. And not only does this sweater have a wool yarn, 100% wool yarn in this ochre golden color, it also has a more neutral beige, I'm going to say cream color, a more neutral cream color for the sleeves and for the very ends of one of the side panels, and for a couple of rows on one of the other side panels. And I used Lion Brand Comfy Cotton. Now, Lion Brand Comfy Cotton and Iona wool are both DK weight yarns. So not only was I changing the fiber content, I was also changing the weight of the yarn, as in DK versus the worsted. So that means that I had to adjust my hook size to a 4.5 millimeter hook. Now I know that when working with DK weight yarns, people tend to use a 4mm hook, but I wanted a little bit of drape, so I went up to a 4.5mm hook. Now all these little adjustments that I did while working on the garment is because I already knew how my garment was supposed to behave, or how it was going to turn out. And I know that that's not something that everyone can do. So first things first is what we should really be discussing is the gauge. Because the gauge will really be able to tell us a lot about not only if our tension matches the designer's tension, but also of the characteristics of our fiber. Will it stretch? How will it stretch? Will it stretch widthwise? Will it stretch lengthwise? How drapey is our fabric gonna be? Should I go up or should I go down a hook size, depending on the drape you're wanting to achieve? So all those things are very important, and that's why, even though I myself dislike making gauge swatches, it's something that I highly recommend when you are considering substituting yarns, because you really want to look at that end product that you're supposed to have if you follow all the directions, and see how it compares to your swatch. So let's take a look at my gauge. Now, to start with, I will be reading some of the measurements that I took on the original monthly sweater pattern that you can see me wearing here right now, so that you can see how that looks versus the Iona wool version that I am wearing, which you will also see after, and you can just get an idea of how they both look and the big general differences. So as I said, it's a little caveat that I was not able, with the yarn that I had, I wasn't able to crochet the size 2 of the garment, which is what I originally wanted to do, to have, you know, compare apples to apples. So we're basically here comparing apples to applesauce. So let's start with the sleeve. In the Snuggle Puff version, or in any version, the instructions state to crochet the sleeve until you have 11.5 inches, or your preferred length. In the Snuggle Puff version, that was 32 rounds. And in the Iona wool version, that was 35 rounds of extended single crocheted in the round with a 4.5mm hook. So you might say, well, that's not a huge difference. There's only 3 rounds off. Now, another thing to consider here is, like I said, the gauge, and that is the most important part. So for the original design stated in the pattern, I have 10 rows and 11 stitches with a 6mm hook. And in the Iona wool, I had 12 rows times 13 stitches with a 4.5mm hook. And this, of course, is a measurement in 4 inches overall. Now, I do think that it is possible to adjust that gauge for this second Iona wool version, because, as I said, I only washed this, let it soak, and then laid it flat to dry. I didn't pin it. So if I were to really block this aggressively, I would get a lot more width than I have. So currently in the Snuggle Puff pattern, size 1 states that you should have 44?
Size 1 should have 42 inches around the bust.
Inches? I have 36 right now. But I have not steamed the side panel on this right side. I have not steamed it. So I think that we should go steam this and then come back and measure again and compare.
When steaming with an iron, I just let the iron hover slightly about a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch above the garment, and I really try hard not to touch any of the fabric with the iron, because since this is a cotton acrylic, it will melt the acrylic. I also like to steam the garment on both sides to make sure that my stitches look the best that they can.
Alright, pardon my messy hair, but trying to get this shirt on without messing up my hair, very hard, and you'll see why. So I'm going to stand up in a little bit and show you how this looks post steaming. The differences aren't glaring, but it does feel more relaxed. So one of the other measurements that I hadn't shared with you was that from the neckline to the cuff, the Snuggle Puff sweater measures 25 inches. Now this one, after steaming, from the neckline to the cuff measures 21 inches. Is that hair? So in the first video fit that I shared with you, I had not steam blocked this, and I was hoping that when I steam blocked it, the like super bulk that you see around the armpit area wouldn't exist anymore. I think that the reason that happened is, of course, now again due to the yarn. So the Snuggle Puff version is a lot more oversized. So even in size 1, I would have had about 11 inches of positive ease on the garment, so the dropped shoulder would have come down much more low. The dropped shoulder would have been lower, which would mean that the armhole depth would have also been lower to about here. And the extra bulk around the garment wouldn't have been as obvious as it is in this one. You can see a little bit of that bulk right there. And as I said, that is due to the armhole depth being too close to my arm, so there's not enough room for the sweater to breathe. Is it still wearable? Yes. Does that annoy me? Yes. So if you, like me, are planning on substituting for a DK weight yarn that you have in stash, then you might consider trying it on before you add the sleeves, and then when you seam more of an armhole depth. I left here 6.25 inches, so maybe seam 7 inches of armhole depth if you're making size 1 in a DK weight. Okay, so that is something to note with this monthly sweater, that if you're going to be substituting yarns, really pay attention to your armhole depth so you can really avoid the bulkage that you're going to get right underneath the armpits. Another thing that is very obvious to me is the fit of the neckline. Now, because I've tried on this sweater several times and I just steamed it, the neckline fits much more comfortably. But originally, the neckline was a bit of a struggle to get over my head, but then it fit just fine around the neck. So I would just caution you that if you have a bigger head, my head is about 21 inches. So if you have a bigger head and you're a bit concerned with that, then you have to adjust at the very, very beginning two rectangles of the front and back panel. So these beginning two rectangles in the front and back panel are what determine the kind of width, the width of the neckline. But also one thing to consider is that in the case of this sweater, this version, second version that I've made, I know that it's going to stretch more because, as I said, I used a comfy cotton blend and that is a lot denser than the wool, so it's going to pull that down. Especially because given the modular construction of this sweater are rows, so remember that crochet stretches more if you're going horizontally, crochet stretches more vertically than it does horizontally. But if you are change the direction of your crochet and your rows now denote width, then your garment is going to stretch widthwise, which is the case with this monthly sweater and with the Eat Cake sweater and also with the what should I call that vest? The Summer Breeze top. So those are three of my patterns that use a modular construction, and I find it very favorable because it allows you to kind of just add and piece together however you need to, which, you know, it's why it's called modular, in case you were wondering. But yes, overall, I still managed to produce a wearable garment. There are obvious glaring differences, especially when it comes to how oversized the garment is. Right? Oh, I didn't tell you. Right now, it went from 38 inches to... No, it went from... Alexa, what's 19 times 2?
19 times 2 is 38.
It now measures 38 inches, thank you. But I haven't wet blocked this other wool section here. I just steamed it with you guys, so you saw that. But again, cotton acrylic doesn't have that much give. Also, for this Iona wool sweater, I did do knit ribs around the neckline and the cuffs, same as with the Snuggle Puff monthly sweater. But in this one, I did something that I saw one of my store-bought knit sweaters had, and it's that they start out with a knit rib and then they just kind of do a couple of rounds of plain knitting, and that curls it out, and I love that look, so I went for it. So yes, width of this sweater in size 1, with the caveat that I used wool yarn, DK weight, and a 4.5mm hook, is 38 inches, which is still 5 inches of positive ease. Very comfortable, not as oversized as I would have liked, but as you saw, fits my bust well, fits my waist well, fits my hips just fine. Well, I left that little gap because if I closed it, I knew it wouldn't fit my hips well. But you get where I'm going with this. Also, the other glaringly obvious difference is that this sweater, using the same stitch count, okay, is only 20 inches long. So there is a 5-inch shortage, but it is still a good length. So if, like I said, you're planning to substitute a DK weight yarn and you want an more oversized, this was 5 inches of positive ease for me. So if maybe you want 10 inches of positive ease, possibly size up. I think given my gauge with this DK weight sweater, if I would have made a size 2, I am pretty confident that I would have had a 44-inch around the bust, which 10 inches of positive ease is perfectly fine for an oversized sweater. In fact, that is where the term oversized starts, with 10 inches of positive ease. So yeah, making size 2 with a DK weight yarn would have still yielded something that I would have been able to wear. Now, I want to caution you that this is not necessarily the case when you substitute yarns. For example, substituting wool for a 100% cotton, you have to take into account that the 100% cotton doesn't really stretch. And once it does stretch, that's the way it's going to stay. It's never going to have the wool memory, it's never going to go back. And also, its drape is entirely different from wool. So that is something to consider. As I said, I was very, very lucky that in this experiment, I chose a wool yarn to share contrast with, which still, while it has different properties, stretches very nicely and can still accommodate my body within its confines. So if you also want to use a DK weight wool, you can. You just have to keep in mind that it won't be as long, it won't be as oversized, and please keep in mind that your drop shoulder might be smaller, so you may want to increase the armhole depth to avoid that bulkage right there. Now, is this the case anytime you're going to substitute yarns? Absolutely not. Which is why, once again, you really do need to use a gauge swatch when you're planning on substituting yarns. And even if your gauge is just 2 stitches off, don't think that that will add up in the overall sweater. Because as you saw, my gauge was just 2 stitches off, and even using wool, I was not able to get the width designated for size 1. I actually got the width designated for size 0, which is 38 inches, if I'm not mistaken. If I am, editing Clarissa will correct me right here, or she'll do a voiceover, say, meh, this is what's actually correct. Because while I might have, of course, looked at my pattern and read it thoroughly, I do not remember all the sizes. Actually, let's go check that. Latest crochet pattern, exit the ad, and let's go all the way down to sizes. So size 0 is the 38-inch bust, which is what I got using a DK weight yarn 4.5mm hook and following the instructions for size 1. Now, if you read the pattern, then you know that the stitch count for length is the same for all of the patterns, okay? So what we're adjusting is really the width. So size 1 is supposed to be 42 inches in width. I did not get that. As we've just stated, I got 38 inches of width. So that is something that you really do need to consider. Also, another thing to keep in mind is because I used smaller yarn, smaller hook, my drop shoulder, as I mentioned, is not the same. So I actually have, as I said, 35 rounds in those 11.5 inches, and I actually think I went up to 12 inches before I steamed it. Because of course in the original sweater you're doing 11.5 inches, but after that you're going to steam and wash, so those sleeves will stretch a little bit more. In this case, when I wash it, the sleeves will stretch a lot more, but not too much. I usually tend to go with 3/4 inch sleeves because even though when you're really cold, you kind of want the sleeve to here, when you're working around the house or crocheting or doing anything, those sleeves get in the way. So yes. If you have any questions of yarn substitutions or anything like that, let me know in the comments below. If you are very interested in modular crochet constructions, then as I mentioned, I have 2 other patterns that use the modular crochet. Actually, no, 3 other patterns that use a modular type of crochet construction. That is the Eat Cake sweater, that is the Summer Breeze top, and the Yavana vest. So I will link those patterns for you down below. Each of those patterns comes with a video tutorial or a video help guide and extra pictures also included in the patterns to help you along your crocheting journey. And if you like what I do, then, you know, don't forget to hit the thumbs up. If you're subscribed, thank you so much. If you are new here, thank you. Thank you, YouTube, for recommending my video. And I hope that you found today's video useful, and of course that you enjoyed spending a little bit of crafty time with me today. As I said, if you have any questions pertaining to the monthly sweater, then please leave them in the comments section below. And also, if you like my video and would like to donate, then you can head to my Ko-fi page, which is also linked down below, and I will definitely give you a shout out in this channel. So if whatever message you write there, I will be reading and sharing with you guys, because it thrills me to no end to know that you guys like my work, you crochet my patterns, and that we all have fun just crafting together. So thank you so much for joining me in this video. This is the last video for January. I know, I cannot believe that we managed to record for Clarissa, managed to record 4 videos during the month of January, but I am very proud of the content I put out this month, and let me know what you felt about it. Did you like these little mini stories of exploring a pattern and doing little video guides, video tutorials? If you have a tutorial that you would like me to do for a technique or anything, please also comment down below. For next month, I am hoping to have my husband's raglan sweater finished. So we're going to have a tutorial for the split extended single crochet stitch coming your way, and also a vlog, slightly informal podcast all about my husband's raglan sweater. So if you're interested in raglan sweater or crocheting for a male significant other in your life, then do subscribe and wait for those videos. They'll be coming out next month. I haven't filmed them because I haven't finished crocheting my husband's sweater. I am still 1.5 sleeves in, because I decided that after I split the yoke, I was going to do the sleeves and then head on over to the body. So yeah, you can look forward to that as well. And I just really thank you guys for being here and for commenting, watching, and just generally being your great crafty self. Until we meet again, which will be very soon if I have anything to say about it, then I bid you a goodbye, and also want to tell you that I am working with May Sonder, who's a fellow crafty friend here, for a mug design that I'm very excited about. And also, if you can't wait to catch up with me, you can sign up to my newsletter where I send out guys, COVID brain, I still have it, but I send out my newsletter as of right now every Sunday. I've been good this year, every Sunday. And in my newsletter you will find tidbits of what I've been up to this week, what I'm hoping to crochet on, patterns that have caught my attention, and just general things that I'm loving at the moment. So if that is something that interests you, and especially the little sneak peeks, then head on over to my website, link in the description box, and subscribe to my newsletter. Also, if you do decide to donate on Ko-fi, thank you so much for that. And thank you just for spending crafty time with me and visiting my website, watching my videos. Okay, I think I've said enough thank yous, although there's never enough thank yous. But anyway, thank you for joining me for this What Happens When We Substitute Yarns video. If you would like me to do another video of this with, for example, the Eat Cake sweater, then please comment down below and I will do one for you guys. Okay, that is it. That really is it. Happy crafting.
P.S. I'm sharing a video here of how the original Snuggle Puff version of the monthly sweater fits versus how the new one fits.